If you're an occupational therapist who feels like you should have it all figured out by now, but don't, you're not alone. Welcome to the OT Coaching Confidential. This podcast is a little different to most. Each episode is a real mentoring conversation with an occupational therapist somewhere in Australia, navigating their own professional growth. I'm Alyce, a paediatric OT and founder of the OT Coach Australia. And this week I'm joined by Paige, an experienced OT working in adult mental health and psychosocial disability within the NDIS space. In this conversation, we explore what happens when your clinical systems are working, your caseload feels steady, and your confidence has grown, but you're starting to wonder, what else is out there? Is there something more I could do? We talk about managing complex and often invisible disability, pacing our non-face-to-face work, building structure into your weeks, and a big conversation around stepping into supervision in a meaningful and intentional way. Now let's get started. Welcome, Paige. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Now tell me a little bit about you. How did you become the OT that you are today?
I started a little bit later than some of the other people in my cohort because I had originally done a bachelor in science and I was dead set. I wanted to do genetic counseling. I was in love with that. Did not get in. It was a blessing in disguise in hindsight. So I didn't even know OT existed till I'd already done my undergrad, then went through the master's program. After that, moved into working directly as an LAC for NDIS. So very much an NDIS baby. Went to, after a couple of years of that, community practice, still in the NDIS space. Very quickly burnt out in that. That was not a great fit, really high KPIs for a new grad early career clinician and not as much support as I really would have liked. So then ended up doing 3 days a week with a smaller provider, animal assisted therapy, pediatric caseload, still doing OT. That was a really big jump for me. I did not realize I was going to be the only OT there and setting up the program. So really good skill building, but a lot. And at the same time as that, setting up my sole trader business a couple of days a week, building that up from there with the mental health adult caseload. So now I'm doing that full time
So how long have you been working for yourself?
since 2021. It's about 4 or 5.
And how long were you an OT before that? So you're sort of around 10-ish years in practice?
Not even quite. And this is where I never know
Yeah.
whether to count that LAC time as like I was an OT. It's developing great initial interview skills, but I was not doing any interventions. I was not employed as an OT.
Yeah.
It's always like, does that even count?
I mean, you were working and you were using your OT skills. So was that a couple of years?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
So I've
it's
been on
hard.
8 years then.
Yeah. Okay. I have had other people I've chatted to that have come through that LAC pathway or that early intervention pathway. And it can be so tricky because, again, I think they think that we know what we know when we hit the ground. And you're like, well,
Yeah.
I actually know nothing. So
Yes.
thank you. This is great. I don't know how to even be an OT yet, let alone be an OT in this type of role, which sort of would have been a blessing in disguise as well for you. It would have made it a little bit easier to just learn the scope of the role that you were in without worrying about other bits and pieces. How
Yeah.
interesting. So then that transition would have been massive coming out of that into clinical world. And although,
Yes.
like, sometimes when you start with those different types of roles, you get really good at all your soft skill stuff. So, your communication, like you said, your onboarding, you would have learned all about like navigating tricky families and having hard conversations, probably a fair bit of conflict management as well. Things that we typically in PEDS world wouldn't get a lot of exposure to.
Yeah, because that was the side I felt much more comfortable around,
Mm.
particularly with initial assessment interviews was like piece of cake.
Yep.
But
Yep.
then the actual intervention side, what
Mm.
do I sit down and do with this child?
Yep.
Because like I don't have kids, I'd never really interacted with kids.
Mhm.
Even just being with them was a really big change.
Totally. And we do a lot of this in my big workshop, The Art of Peds. So, because there's so much of, like you said, people just expect that you know how to hold space for kids and all these things. And then you get there and you're like, do I get angry? Do I not get angry? Do I be forceful and make you sit, or am I playful? What am I meant to do? And what's actually an OT's role in that? Or, just that thing. I'm thinking when we're seeing plans come out now where they say monthly therapy, because if we didn't know and we hadn't done this clinical work, be like, yeah, of course, that's probably fine. And then you get on the ground, you're like, oh no, that probably didn't really work. So again, probably better that you did that before rather than after.
Yeah, that definitely gave a really good like foundation.
Okay, so how did we end up in the mental health space? I suppose there's a fair bit of the science piece to it, like thinking about what you were interested in learning and when you were studying and all of those sort of things. How did you end up over there?
I've always been interested in doing the mental health side. I do not want to do pediatrics. It is not for me. I had a mental health placement that was very challenging, not so much from the client side. I really enjoyed that, but management side down
Mhm.
was really, yeah, not a great time. And one of those things of feedback I got in supervision was that basically they didn't think I was cut out to be a mental health OT. I should look at other fields. I shouldn't do that.
Ooh,
It's
interesting.
like,
What?
ooh,
Why were they
okay.
saying that? Why were they giving you that feedback?
I think particularly because some of my emotional responses and taking on that feeling of personal responsibility for
Mm,
clients.
mm,
So, like, I
yep,
was
seeing
regularly
that.
crying in supervision. It was really not great,
Mm.
but the response and feedback in supervision just compounded that.
100%. I have had these chats with people before. I did a mental health placement and I regularly reflect that no one taught you how to deal with the crap we were hearing. No one taught you how to hold that, not get hurt by it, not take on that compassion fatigue. But actually, you haven't taught the skills for me to be able to do that. That hasn't been given to me. And as OTs, we don't get that. We see this, you would have seen that in your LAC role, in your PEDS roles. Like we get told a lot. No one's told us how to listen to that without just absorbing it in, particularly in that
Mm,
early time. Oh, okay. So, how did you bounce back from that and continue on your interest in that pathway?
I think definitely gained a lot of confidence through that LAC role and having that bit more experience with psychosocial disabilities.
Mm-hmm.
And I do have lived experience with mental health stuff. I was
Mm-hmm.
later diagnosed neurodivergent.
Yep.
After all of this, after I'd started as a sole trader, it was like, oh, that explains a lot. So now
Mm-hmm.
that I've got the support and systems that work for me, all of those things that were previously really challenging and burning me out, like, I don't know if I can even be an OT. Do I even, like, should I just leave the profession? And they're like, oh, easy.
So interesting. And I think this is a really common story that we see across the clinical landscape when we do identify our own neurodivergence or start understanding how we just work better, right? Like who we are, how do we show up, how do I protect myself? And that is different across each of us. So when you say mental health work now, are you
Mhm.
in that primary psychosocial space or is it more of a neurodivergent space or a bit of a mixture of both? What's your caseload look like?
It is a bit of a mixture of both.
Mm,
I'd probably say it's about probably 50-50 split at the moment. And
yeah.
obviously there's often mental health things that come with being neurodivergent, but it's
Mm,
a little bit of a different
yeah.
presentation
Yeah.
than your kind of pure psychosocial.
And how did you do your training to get into that pure psychosocial space? Was that some of those roles that you'd picked up, or you've gone to particular trainings? How did you get here?
Some of it was through those more community-based roles,
Mm,
having a chance to do that, a lot of external supervision
yep.
and CPD training courses. So
Mm,
specifically in a lot of those modalities like acceptance and commitment therapy, dialectical behavioral therapy, to kind of give me that
mhm.
basis.
Great. And are you BAM registered, or is that something that you're looking at?
I am currently in the process of that, about
Mm,
to submit the application.
yeah, how cool. So tell me a bit about your clinical practice then. Are you doing more specific, like your acceptance commitment therapy and your
Yeah,
CBT therapy, like, those more specific intervention modalities? Is that what you're offering, or is it a bit of a mixture?
definitely a mixture
Mm,
because I am primarily in that NDIS space.
yeah.
I have to be really careful treading that line of not overlapping too much with psychology and
Hmm.
still being really disability focused. So I find I do still use those modalities as my
Yep.
core
Yep.
approach and guide.
Mm,
But then a lot of the specific strategies and interventions, still a lot of things with like pacing, energy conservation, graded
mm,
exposure, a lot of daily routines.
yep.
Yeah,
And so is your caseload mainly NDIS, or have you got some private payers as well?
at the moment, it's about 95% NDIS,
Mhm.
5% private,
Yep.
which is something I'd really like to adjust a bit more so I've got some more
Mm.
diversity in those income streams and pathways.
Absolutely. And when you get your BAM registration, that should assist with that as well. And are they primarily coming to you for therapy? I feel like this can be so tricky when you're getting that more psychosocial disability space. Like you said, you've got to walk that line between treatment and capacity building, which previously would just have all rolled in together and it would have been really easy to just do whatever they were needing. So, what are they coming to you for when you're getting referrals? What are they seeking from the OT?
A lot of them are for functional capacity assessments. They've
Yeah.
had a first plan or a renewal of a plan that's really not meeting their needs.
Yep.
So coming in and because a lot of these disabilities are not immediately apparent or not
Mm,
visible, NDIS planners can have a harder time understanding than like, oh, someone's in a wheelchair, you physically cannot do this.
yeah.
You
Yeah.
cannot get up.
Mm,
Whereas those barriers may be equally real for a person with psychosocial disability who can't get out of bed, who can't
mm,
do those things, but it's not seen in the same way.
yeah.
So a lot of it starts with that FCA, and then sometimes as people stay on with me for capacity building sessions if they have the funding.
Yep.
Sometimes I do see people just for capacity building sessions,
How it
about 60% FCA, 40% capacity building.
Okay. And how are those referrals coming to you? Are they coming from support coordinators, planners, general? Like, how are you getting people?
A lot are through support coordinators. Most people
Mm,
do have support coordination,
yep.
but I'm finding longer I've been in this space, there's not a lot of providers in my area. We're more kind of rural regional. So
Mm,
a lot is just through word of mouth.
yeah. And so when they refer across to you, are they coming in via a screening tool or your website, or how are you actually getting people on and through to you?
A lot is through the website. So I'll try and
Hmm.
direct people to go through there. I don't want to
Yep.
be getting random phone calls. I'm often
Mm,
with clients. It's really not great. It's
yep.
like through the website, go through
Mm,
there. There's the intake form,
yep.
and then screening from there.
And then on the intake form, is it screening for your
Yeah.
functionals versus all of that? Yeah, cool. And how are you going sort of managing? Because I know lots of people who have that mix, like therapy caseload and functionals or other more non face to face work, the mixture of both interfacing can be quite challenging to hold as the therapist. How do you go with that? Or is that an area that you've sort of hacked and navigating pretty well?
I actually really like having the different
Mm.
ones. I find if I'm only doing one headspace, I get really bored of it.
Hmm. Oh, yes,
So I
definitely.
like having the mix, and I couldn't do 100% FCAs. It would just melt my
Mm.
brain. It's too
Yep.
much information to just hold.
Yep. And have you done things then like you're only on board one new functional and you give yourself a certain amount of time? Like what works best for you and the way that you figured out how you work well?
Yeah, I do generally have that kind of pacing out of I know if I take on about one functional capacity per week, by the
Mhm.
time I've done their assessment process over a few weeks and then write the report, they're all kind of coming out at around that same time.
Mm. Mm. Did that take a while to figure out? Because this is a massive area for many therapists that I talk to where it's so hard to know how quickly we're pulling people in and how long things are going to take and how do you sit holding so many open things. But probably again, your lack of experience would have helped with that. Like having that experience of having so many open cases where you had things sort of part done. Because I think for a lot of us, we come from, a more therapy heavy space where then having a lot of these open ended reports is really tricky, or you're in the end, or you're with everybody else who's in that middle bit, which is just often quite tricky to figure out how to make that work.
Yeah, I think that's been one of the easier aspects for me, again, coming from
Mm,
that LAC background where you'd have your caseload for the year might be 150, 200 people, and they're
yeah.
all always open. No one's
Mm,
ever closed
mm,
or finished.
yeah.
So I'm
Yeah.
quite happy sitting in that space of like, yep, that
Mm,
person's pending, they're waiting to get back from me is in that column,
yeah.
or I need to do something in this column, that's fine.
Mm. And do you hold that in your head or are you using a spreadsheet?
I know that's on a spreadsheet. Yeah,
I was going to say that is actually amazing if you just hold that all in your head.
no, I wish.
Cool. So what does your sort of split of caseload look like? You said you've got about 60%, was it 60 clinical and 40 functional? And then what does that look like?
It's very much based on more the town or area rather than
Mm,
like a day
mm,
for FCAs or
yep.
because it is over a larger area, I really need to be mindful with that travel time and
Mm,
grouping to people
mm,
together. So I'll say Monday's my day in town A,
yep.
Tuesday's my day in town B. If you can do that day, cool, I'll see you there. If not,
Mm,
maybe we need to do telehealth.
mm,
It's a little bit easier for FCAs because I'm not going there regularly.
yep. Yep. You can do that one off
Yeah.
outreach a lot easier. Oh, this is so interesting. So I've just come out of another pod that'll be on just before your one, where we were talking about very similar scenario, but because the caseload's very mixed of all the different needs, and we were trying to narrow and have those individual days, but then having to think, well, now you've got to switch headspaces so much. but that's something you thrive in. I think I'd be okay with it as well. Now that I don't need to learn so much, I could hold many different approaches across those days. But I think it probably just depends on where your competence level is sitting with different things and your processes, because you've obviously got some really nice processes around that stuff too.
Yeah, and it's stuff that because I've been doing this for a few years now, it's all built up over that time. Usually, once I
Mm,
run into an issue and go, "Ooh, this isn't working," that needs
yep.
to be different.
Yep. Yep. Which probably leans to you thinking that you're a bit more of a reflective practitioner. So, which is nice when you're a mental health clinician to be reflective because it's kind of needed. But, being able to reflect, not perseverate, and then make changes quite quickly, which allows you to continue improving and moving. So, I know one of your questions is around, do I look at supervision and things like that? This is the stuff that we need to acknowledge we've found it easy because we've built these strategies and we've reflected and we've wondered and we've improved. When we come in, sometimes it's hard to supervise and be like obviously, obvious, surely you just do that. Doesn't that just make perfect sense? But that's when you do start supervising others. It'll be good to think about, have I talked through the context of how I got to the conclusions that I've made?
Yeah, and I've ended up, I feel like a lot of the things I've ended up
Mm,
doing, and then through a lot of reflection and effort in that, I will get my skill level up to where it needs to be.
yep.
But I'd
Yep.
like to be a lot more proactive this time before
Mm, mm,
jumping in and then trying to play this catch-up game again. So I
absolutely.
have been providing external supervision just for a couple of OTs at my previous workplace because
Cool.
they don't have a senior OT.
Yep.
I'm like, oh, until you find someone else, I'll do it. And now we're kind of a year on. I'm like, oh, actually, like I really enjoy doing this.
Absolutely. I think it's a really lovely thing to offer when you're sitting in that nice peak space where you are. You're at that master level for your clinical work. You've finished your growth there. The business is moving along. So it's a nice area to have a little growth, but it's not too intense that it's overwhelming and takes everything away. So tell me a bit about the clinical support that you're providing. So sometimes I like to think about external supports. Is it ongoing clinical supervision, which I'm now starting to talk like term professional supervision, which might be nicer for you to think about. So professional supervision, because it can encompass their clinical work, their professional skills, all of the stuff. And it's more that ongoing, where sometimes when people think clinical supervision, it's like, I'll come to you for one case. Like, oh, I feel like there's lots of other things we need to chat about here before I answer that one question that you've come to me for. So are you thinking that you want to do more the ongoing type, like that ongoing professional supervision, or more like ad hoc type support?
Preferably that more ongoing one with
Mm,
that
mm,
kind of relationship and then being able to better know that person and support
yep,
them. But I
yep.
wouldn't be against doing some ad
Mm.
hoc.
Yeah. I think thinking about your caseload ad hoc makes more sense if it's someone that you know and you know where they sit, you know where their clinical skills sit, and then you can do that more one-off support where it is
Mm.
problem solving. I find that sometimes quite tricky. Someone comes to me and then I'm unpacking going, oh, actually, there's many steps you've missed. I can't just answer that question. But if we had a little period of time to sort of navigate through, so that might be worth just thinking about as we're setting up that second pathway, that you're pushing more to more regular sessions as well. So you've done some PDs around supervision or some reading around different supervision models and things like that?
A bit. So I did find the OTA released supervision framework was
Yep.
really helpful
Yep.
in I'm very much a visual person. So
Mm,
being able to put that together a bit more,
yep.
as well as there was like a little Victorian allied health one, which
Mm,
wasn't as helpful. I would
yep.
love to someday do the Michelle Bahari training, but
Mm.
just not in the budget quite yet.
Michelle's one's fantastic. It'll be really helpful and really aligned with how you want to practice as well. So Michelle's is great reflective practice, putting scaffolds around everything. And like you said, in the back of the OTA one, we've got structure, we've got templates, we've got bits and pieces in there to think about as well. So what are you charging? So this can sometimes be tricky when you're going back to an old workplace. Sometimes we have mischarged or undercharged our time, and that can be quite challenging.
Originally, I had started out with them because, again, it wasn't something I was looking at doing
Mm,
seriously. It's just a bit of like a bit of side money. So that was 160 an hour, including GST,
mhm.
which is
Yep.
obviously lower than everything else
Mm,
I do is at the NDIS rate.
yep. Yep.
And I know the business financially is struggling a little bit and
Mm,
probably
mm,
wouldn't be able to afford higher than that, which is
mm.
otherwise I probably would have increased it.
Yeah. Yeah. So it can be really hard when you have those personal relationships, but this will always be a mindset that you will have where I find this, but they won't be able to afford it. And I want them to be able to afford it. But if people value it, they will come to the party. So maybe even bringing it up to your NDIS rate, including GST. So it is a jump, but you're not jumping up and above. So it's still losing you a little smidge of money. But you could just say, I've, like every business, reviewing my prices, and I've realized that I have to increase this, because the reality is you're losing money on offering that. So if you want to maintain it, and then we do the value way up of how much do I really love it? How much do I want to lose money on it? Where does that sit? And it's probably sitting quite fine at the moment, but it's probably not too tricky to just think about bringing it up to your standard hourly rate and just say you've reviewed everything.
Yeah, it's definitely an option. What I had kind of considered doing as well is if I'm offering supervision outside of that, just
Mm,
starting at that rate, and then that may be that just one person I have at the lower rate
mm.
kind of hanging on.
Yeah, I have a lot of those, so I would
Yeah.
not suggest that that's a good strategy. Okay, so tell me a bit about how you structure your external supervision. Is it done on telehealth? Are you doing it face to face? What does that look like?
It is face to face currently because it
Mm-hmm.
is quite, it's only like 10 minutes from my house, so it's quite
Mm,
doable on the way to other stuff.
yep.
I am finding though that the busier I get with other clients, that is getting harder to fit in and may need
Yep.
to move to telehealth,
Absolutely.
which would be an option. I've done that a couple of times with them.
Yeah. So you're doing joint sessions or individual sessions with them?
One of the therapists there is still, well, she wouldn't be a new grad anymore, but an
Mm-hmm.
early career clinician, maybe 1 year out. So
Yep.
I'm doing fortnightly supervision with her. And then
Mm-hmm.
on the alternating fortnight is like a peer or group supervision with the entire team. And she comes to that as well.
Okay. And are you charging any different for the peer work?
No.
These are things that I had to navigate through, but it's different. You can just rock up to supervision. You have to be prepared for peer work, different skill set. You'd charge more for a group. If you're running a therapy group, you'd make more money because it's more work, more facilitation. So all of these things are just good to think about moving forward. We don't need to tweak what you've got. The other bit, I bet you're not charging for travel. The
No,
extra
I'm
time that
not.
it takes you to get there, like all of that sort of stuff. So ways that I've mitigated a lot of that is pushing it to telehealth, because then I just take that out. You're not having to charge me extra for that. Because yes, that part is tricky. And they get it because their therapists are on an hourly rate as well, and they're billable, like all of those sort of things. But if we don't protect ourselves, then they're never going to say, you know what, I've realized that we're using more of your time than what we're paying you for. Can I pay you more?
Yeah.
Okay. So talk to me then about your approach in supervision. So I think listening to where you're at, you sound like a really competent clinical therapist and you've got some really good clinical pathways. What have you found? Are your strengths quite solid with that new grad and helping to bring them on that journey? What did you find with that? Or was it a bit bumpy? What did that feel like?
I found that new grad side was a lot easier
Mm-hmm.
than it's a really mixed bunch of therapists in the team. Some of them have been therapists for quite a lot longer than I have, so they would be considered very senior, but they
Mm-hmm.
didn't have experience in that pediatric space.
Yep.
So in that area, I was more experienced in providing supervision
Mm-hmm.
because one of them was actually my supervisor on placement when I was at uni, which is
Yep.
a really weird dynamic at the start.
Mm-hmm.
But I think once we got more comfortable with each other and went, okay, we them trusting as well that I do have some of those skills and
Mm-hmm.
competence in those areas, then
Yep.
that switched over really quickly.
And
I
what does the
mm,
peer supervision look like? Are you going in and talking to a topic? Are you just answering questions? What does it look like?
it's a bit of a combination. So we've got some set time. They'll kind of suggest topics or areas that they'd like to learn a bit more about. Like
Mm-hmm.
one session, we did the entire one just for training on sensory profile.
Yep.
And so what would it usually be is some structured time for more information about like how do I work with children with a PDA presentation? How can I best support
Mm-hmm.
that more
Yep.
broader skill set? And
Mm.
then there's time for specific clinical questions as well.
Are you preparing for this? Like, are you having to go and put slides together?
No,
So just
this
sort of
is, yeah,
chatting
it's
when
a
you're
lot of
there?
things I
Yeah.
already have a lot of resources for.
Yeah.
Over those years I've worked in there, I've built up that kind of stuff.
But again, thinking moving forward, they are like little mini workshops and you are accidentally giving a lot of training and charging nothing for it. So something to think about. Like I brought in a mini workshops amount. I have a peer rate amount. So if I've got, I think if it's a group of like 4 and above, it's a different rate to my one-on-one supervision. Joint supervisions have, again, a different rate, which is very confusing in my mind, but makes sense to go, these are different services that I'm offering, because otherwise you're not valuing how much stuff you're giving. And we're just giving lots and lots and lots, which is really, really lovely if you're employed by them, but you're not.
Yeah, and it's kind of ended up in that it was not that space originally, but because I want to be
Yep.
helpful and go, oh, well,
Mm-hmm.
it would be really great if we just did a sensory profile
Yep.
training. I can see you
Yep.
guys are doing a lot of that and never got
Mm,
formal training, but it
mm.
is a
Yep.
different level of, yeah.
So maybe it's just worth going and having a reach out with the owner, manager, and like talk about what is feasible and what's realistic. And maybe those things are more intentional, or there's a couple of real intentional training sessions and you get paid as such, like, training in the sensory profile. I think that would help to tidy up that interrelational piece between you and the different people too, if you're a bit clearer around what your intention of this service looks like. So I want other people to have more experience in the room as well, because I'm not on the ground in their practice to know how things are done day to day. So often I might be saying, we do it this way. And then they're like, we're not allowed to. This isn't how the service works. Like, oh, okay, let's flush this out together.
And that seems to be a really common theme we're running into that, particularly in that business.
Mm,
They're really lovely, but the owners and management are not allied health.
yep.
So there's been a few points where and that was great for my professional development of needing to be much firmer and be able to
Mm,
advocate really clearly
mm.
about why we need those changes or why we're asking for this.
Yeah. So I've actually retermed my support for this to, I last year I decided to call it integrated supervision, where it's I'm integrated into the workplace. I have a feedback pathway up to management. So I can say overwhelmingly, I'm hearing this, this is, and then I've got a pathway back down. This year I've started calling it in-house support. So in-house supervision, in-house like workshops and training and things like that, which helps me to clarify it, because what you haven't hit just yet, when you do pure external supervision, there's no feedback loop. I'm not the business's support, and it's quite a different scope. So that, I think, is something curious for you to have a bit of a think about in terms of these service offerings for supervision, to just help be clear where confidentiality sits and where, how they can speak to you and all of those sort of things. Because if you haven't pre-thought of that and then you get an email saying, can you do a summary of their performance? Can you contribute? And you're like, well, no, like this is a fully external service. It's confidential. I don't need to have that feedback loop back to you. Where for this in-house stuff or integrated stuff that I'm doing, they know it's an open pathway. So they are aware that I chat, which I actually really prefer that model. I don't mind the external stuff, but say there's an easy tweak we could do that makes things a bit easier. Or on the trickier side, if I've got a therapist that's struggling that needs additional support, how do we get that? Like if they can't ask for it and I don't have a pathway to support them to say, hey, like I'm just wondering, we said we were doing those reports and they haven't been done since I spoke to her. So I really do like that sort of integrated piece to have that connection. And the ones that I've had, it's been super great. Like I can give feedback that they feel really overwhelmed, and then we can make sure supports are in places. It's never done for me in that bad way of like, I'm dibber-dobbing on you and you're going to get in trouble. It's more, let's make sure everything is. And then on the flip side, to understand when decisions are made, why they have to work within those parameters rather than just whinging about it and going, well, we wish it was different, but instead go, well, like I get where they're coming from. Let's figure out how to make this work within this clinical space.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense that I'd never really considered that even though in my brain I'm classifying that as external supervision,
Mm,
it's
mm,
really not a traditional external
no.
supervision arrangement.
Yeah. So not that it changes much, but just thinking when you do, or if you do pick up more external people, you won't have that easy feedback loop to settle things down as much, which is just interesting. Again, thinking about your different career levels that you'll get. So your more experienced therapist, and this is, you're gonna have a great time when you come into this space. So getting into that experience space where then you start unpacking and go, oh, actually, I don't know that you have as solid a foundation as what you think you do. Sometimes that's a bit bumpy to get there. But I always like to think that first 3 months is for me to figure out how you work and why you work the way that you do. And then we start tweaking and tidying from there. But particularly, I think in that mental health scope, especially thinking a lot of the people who might approach you will be working in those mixed caseloads where they haven't had specific psychosocial training, let alone any form of like safety training, mental health training, anything like that, but have quite a complex mental health caseload.
Yeah, and I think I would almost find that space easier
Mhm.
because it's like, okay, if I'm starting from step one with you, I
Yeah.
know the pathway because you haven't gone down any of the pathway yet,
Hmm.
rather
Hmm.
than someone who's halfway down, who's maybe
Yeah.
taken a different pathway and then trying to backtrack and
Yeah.
find where we're at.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I wonder the other real benefit of you having this beautiful mental health background is you'll be able to hold space super effectively, but this can also be a little bit tricky. So sometimes it turns into a counseling session rather than a supervision session, which isn't the worst that we've got both those skill sets. But in Michelle's work, she talks a lot about contracting. So having the therapist say to you, what do you want to get out of today's session? So we're not taking it where we're sort of tweaking it together. But I would, because I find this frequently, suspect you could fall into that trap of you're moving into supporting them and being that person, which is still okay, but is the clinical stuff being addressed?
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that's taken me a lot longer to figure out.
Mm,
What should supervision look like? Because it's not
totally.
only clinical questions,
Mm,
but where does that balance lie? Because I've only really got that benchmark of what I found helpful and not helpful
yep.
in
Yep.
supervision, which
Yep.
is not going to apply to everyone.
Mm. And so I wonder, thinking about the different trainings, so OTA also has that big supervision program. I wonder whether you, as it's a big one, takes a long time, but from a theory perspective, you might really value the level of theory that's in there because it talks about different levels of learners and how to look at it across those different professional pillars. And that's why, again, I tend to think I'm more of a professional supervisor rather than clinical. So I want to understand you as a whole and how are you managing your boundaries and your personal and interpersonal piece and all of those things where sometimes I have had people come and they only want clinical. And if I touch on anything else, like, no, I'm not here. But that is
Hmm.
directly impacting on these other things over here. We do need to, I don't want to go into it. We don't need to delve deep, but you do need to acknowledge that you've come in really in a mood today. And that is having a direct impact on the way that you're supporting your clients and why you can't make the decisions that you need to and why your clinical reasoning is not working. So, yeah, it's a challenging space, I think, for us to sit in when you're still in teaching mode or like building clinical skills.
Yeah, and I think it's something that has taken me a lot longer to work out where those specific clinical like caseload questions fit into
Mm-hmm.
supervision
Yeah.
and moving away from that. Oh, if I ask any other questions, like I'm wasting my supervision time. It has to be clinical
Yeah.
practice-based questions.
Yeah, I wrote a template. So, you know how OTA's got theirs, Michelle gives you a different one. The OTA supervision one had a different one. So, I ended up pulling one together where it's like, how are you? What's been going well? What's not going well? Because I found if we were getting too much into what are the clinical areas you need help with, we were missing everything else. So, touch base. How are you going with reports? How are you going with this? How are you going with that? But it's not to delve into it. Then if you say, oh, not great, you go, oh, tell me why. And then that helps to unpack. Same as like what went well and what's not going well. What's not going well helps me to understand. Actually, that sounds like I wonder how we got to this point that happened. Let's unpack that. And that's where that comes in. But it is interesting. I think when I onboard, and this helpful for you to think through. When I onboard an early career therapist, I usually try and do a full caseload review to really vibe out where they're sitting. So it might take a few months to work our way through while giving general support. But through that, I'm also trying to contextualize any information that I'm giving or any challenges that they're coming across. So I've got, and I might flick it over to you, this client snapshot tool, which is actually super handy. So in it, they pop in client diagnosis, age, then they go into the individual differences, then the goals, and then what their therapy approach is going to be. But the most helpful part is what's the 3-month plan. So tell me what you're thinking, where are you going? And then for your new graddies, you can go, oh, you've got no idea. I can tell you what I do for these 3 months. This is what this should look like. And then over time, you start doing it with them. You go, oh, you're going here, but hang on, you've told me these things. You haven't thought about that in this plan that you've come up with over there. So I sort of do that usually for about 6 months with people, which I find super handy to fill the gaps and help understand and systemize things a bit more. Then they tend to be able to cluster those different types of approaches with different types of presentations before going to that more structured one where they're bringing the concerns to you.
Yeah, I think that would be really helpful to get
Mm.
that more context
Yeah.
around where all that stuff's sitting within and those
Mm.
bigger trends to
Yeah.
approach it that way rather than just kind of band-aiding individual clinical questions.
That's what I call it all the time. Just slapping a band-aid strategy on. We're just hoping for the best, where this helps us, particularly when you've done such solid training in proper intervention models. And we know a lot of therapists, particularly floating in that psychosocial space, haven't done those explicit. So they don't have a solid foundation in here's how I should be thinking about everything when I'm working with them. Instead, we're working more top level. And we see this in the PED space as well, where we're solving problems, but we're not going, oh, because I'm sitting in this particular modality when I'm thinking about that approach.
And how do you kind of find that balance in supervision sessions between obviously part of it you do want to be more reflective and encouraging them through
Mm,
their own thought process. That's really valuable. But sometimes, especially
directive.
early career, yeah, I
Mm,
really just needed someone to be directive with
yep.
me and all
Yep.
this reflective stuff. And I'm like, but I don't have the skills yet. I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing.
Agreed. And that's why the OTA workshop pushes you more into that direct teaching and helps you to really understand the different level of learner. Where Michelle's, I love for those, what I got a lot out of Michelle's workshop was work with those more experienced therapists. So similar to you said with that one who'd supervised you, I used to find those more experienced therapists and I'd be like, what am I even, like, what are we doing? Where that then you move more intentionally into reflective practice and hold space there. But I really like, so there is this really great leadership style that my colleague Claire Britton and I have come across, and we've talked about we've got a supervisors space. We're trying to set up a peer mentoring group for supervisors to come together because all of these questions are really valid and really hard to take elsewhere. But we came across this situational leadership model. Well, Claire came across it, sent it to me, and I said, oh my gosh, this makes so much more sense as to how we're understanding where we sit. So essentially, there's 4 quadrants of this model, and they have different levels of directive behavior versus supportive behavior. So they talk about at that lowest quadrant, we're thinking about you need high directive and low supportive behavior. So I can't go and write that report if you have no idea what you're meant to do. I actually need to be very directive in saying, so I would expect this would look like this. You would go and sit with them for 60 minutes. The questions will look like this. Here's the templates, blah, 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 blah. How did you go with that? So thinking about where they're sitting. So that's in that directive section. The next one goes up into the S2 part, which is high directive and high supportive, but it's more coaching. Like, great, you know the structure. Great, you did that really well. Boom, 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 fantastic. But it's still very approaching that structure piece, where then we move down to that S3 where we're being more supportive. Like, you know where you're going, great job, I don't need to tell you what to do. And then you get to delegating, where we can just delegate things. And I think sometimes when we've been trained, and I had a big conversation about this with a mental health colleague of mine who trains lots of therapists, and she was saying, but reflective practice is amazing. I'm like, oh, like I work with a lot of therapists who actually just need direction, who actually just need to be taught what to do. So the other thing I've been thinking about, the difference being, I'm teaching you what to do. I'm not supervising you yet. So there's a difference between teaching you what and how to do rather than supervising you when you're doing that thing. So think about when you have a student on placement, like supervision is a 1 hour chunk where we just talk about everything we did throughout the week. But the rest of the time I'm teaching you, I'm hands-on giving you that exposure experience. And I think this is what gets tricky when we're externally supervising, because they don't have necessarily that internal support as well. So other things I've been doing a little bit recently, I've been doing joint sessions with people through supervision. So I'll either sit back and they run it, or I'll run it and they'll get to watch me, because people learn in such different ways that me just telling you how to do it probably isn't the same as watching me do it, or me watching you do it and then helping to give you tweaks. So that little framework's quite handy to have a think about. But then the other bit that I really like, and I think you'll find this so easy, you treat every supervisee as if they're your client. What are their strengths? Where are they up to? Where's their learning up to? How best do I get them towards whatever their goal is? And sometimes they won't know, just like in real world, won't know what their goal is. So we'll have to motivationally direct them towards a particular goal as that starting point, to be like, oh, I heard you've brought this thing up about 3 times now. I'm wondering whether we need to have a chat about time management. And can I tell you how I do it, how other people do it, and we find that tweak. The other bit thinking about for you, and this is what I was saying at the start, because you have come to your own conclusions of things, what often we forget the thought process that took us there. So we go, Of course, you just do it this way. And then you'll have some people that are like, that doesn't make sense for me. Why would I do it? I won't do it that way. So, for example, I'll often come in and help them do that paper timetable or master timetable. If I don't explain it well enough, they don't take it on board, which then has that ongoing impact. I'm like, but just do it. Like, it's so helpful. I promise it's so handy. So, what the other thing that I've realized over the years is I initially supervised the way I wanted to be supervised, which does not work for everyone. I am very reflective and I'm incredibly pragmatic. If you tell me something, I'll go and look it up, I'll follow through. That's not where everybody is sitting at. So the other bit that can be handy is saying to them, what do you need from me? Do you need me to tell you what to do? Or do you want to talk through your thought process here? And then I can help tweak it. So again, when I have new grads, and we were really lucky that we had, I had a lot of exposure to my internal new grads. So we had about 14 over the years. So I had lots of practice. And really, I made all the mistakes with different people at different times to go, okay, I actually just can't tell you sometimes. Sometimes I have to show you. Sometimes you have to watch it with somebody else. Sometimes it's a PD that you have to go to. But acknowledging that we have to change my approach. So now for some people, I'm very direct and others I'm much more guided, but I've just had to build my skills up. But again, you will have that natural skill set being a mental health clinician.
Yeah, I think that mindset shift helps a lot viewing it that way because exact same as with a client, if we're trying to explore an intervention, if
Yep.
they don't see why, like why should
Mm-hmm.
they? Of course they're not going to do it.
Yep. Yep. Absolutely. And then, you're throwing that as a throwaway comment. So that thing we talked about with you doing that beautiful scheduling in your head, you wouldn't even have that. That could be something people would find hard. That honestly could be 12 months of work that I might spend with someone to get that sorted. But we're going, oh yeah, I told you that strategy. Let's go. Keep on going. The other bit I find quite tricky, but I think that you'll probably find it a bit easier doing the solid goal setting, potentially similar to I teach this in clinical work, but trying to go, what is our 3-month goal? Like, what are we going to get out of supervision? Because that allows you to shift between those different approaches. So this first 3 months, I'm really going to help you understand your caseload in extensive depth. Then we'll move forward into those other professional skills. So that might be the other bit to build in there in a bit more detail. We would often do like a professional goal setting. I'm not great at this with my external therapists. I've got goals for them in my head. I just haven't articulated them particularly well. But once we've set the goals, then we check in on those goals each week as well. So you said these were goal areas. So what I've been doing more recently, and you could do this with the mental health world where they've got the clinical practice framework. They could pick the goals out of there. You could guide the goals. It could be as specific as I want to be able to, do my work in work time and not have it follow over. Or I don't want to take my work home with me and be overwhelmed and upset at home. Like you can tweak those goals. And then we just have those little touch points to see, how did you go? Like for this fortnight, did work blow over? What did that look like? And just, again, being able to pay attention to it will help you to continue progressing forward and not just get stuck just in caseload support.
Yeah, I think that would be really helpful to implement more frequently. I'm
Mm,
good at setting goals right at the start in
yeah,
that
yeah.
contracting original phase, but
Mm,
then as you keep going, we'll kind of touch on them, but it gets a lot looser and
yeah,
muddier. And
yeah.
each session might have some action points, but they're not really clearly linked to
Mm.
any specific goal.
And how are you wrapping up a session? So do you just finish talking and then you go? Does one of you take notes? Is there an agenda that gets finished? Like, what does that look like?
I usually take notes,
Mhm.
but I use Everbility, which is an absolute
Cool.
lifesaver. So it'll just
Yeah.
summarize, and then there's
Yep.
really clear action points if there's anything I said I would do or they said they
Hmm.
would do.
Yep.
Because sometimes I don't have the resource with me, but I know I have it
Mm,
and I'll send it.
yep.
I did listen to some more of your podcast, though, which is really
Mm,
helpful around trying to do some of that in the session.
yeah.
So I'm
Yep.
not taking it home.
And that would be the benefit of telehealth again as well, that you could jump straight into things. So back in the old days, I did all of mine face to face. And once telehealth started, I was like, this is so much easier. Oh my gosh. The other thing I've done for my sessions, they're 50-minute sessions to allow me to pull that together. I'm meant to do those notes straight away. I definitely don't. I do it at the end of the day. But because I do mine all back to back, so I used to just go 9 till 3 back to back supervision all day. It was a lot where now I'm like, oh, I can have a little toilet break. I can go grab a drink. That's lovely. But then I can send those notes afterwards. But it also gives them in that 60-minute session, they've got 10 minutes to think about what we've talked about. Because the biggest feedback I get from a lot of the people I work with is you give me so much to go and look at. They don't have time to look at it. So building that time in, or sometimes I'll say to them to try and book in half an hour after our supervision so they actually have headspace to think through, action, do whatever it is that we've talked about.
Yeah, that would be really helpful as well because I know time management in session is definitely one of the things I'm still working on,
Mm, mm,
particularly if we, near the end of the session, get started on a topic or something that I can see is really helpful and like we're
yep.
so close to getting to the point,
Mm.
I will just go over time.
Yeah. What would that look like in a client session though? Do you blow over
The
in
same.
clients? Same. Yeah. So I
I
think
am having
that's,
that issue there too.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Again, telehealth would help with this because you've got your clock counting down. You've got that clear time frame. If you had the unpaid Zoom session, it'd put you out. So that'd be easy. But I try and keep an eye on the time. I used to do the same thing. That's one of my goals in my supervision is to not let them blow over. And often it's because I haven't contracted hard enough. So I'm ready to go, but they want to talk about something and I'm like, so I've done all the subtle things like reminder, our sessions are 50 minutes, blah, blah, blah. But realistically, I need to be looking and going. And when I'm good at it, I will go. So say I would have a session now, we've got 3 minutes left. I would be like, okay, we're nearly at the end of the session. Is there anything quick you wanted to talk about? If you have a big thing, I'll need to bump it into the next session. But I find I don't do that with the trickier people. And you're working probably in that sort of same space. So that's a little professional goal of my own. So that's why anyone who works with me, if you're getting cut off, that's because it's my goal. Be like, and done. Out you go. We'll catch back up next time. But yeah, having that time I think is really important. But I do find on Zoom it's easier because your clock's in front of you. You're keeping an eye on it the whole way. The other bit that I found really helpful was they would send me their agenda beforehand. So I would know how much needed to be covered in that time. So for some people, like my sole trader sessions, they'll flick me like 50 questions. I'm like, oh, this is a lot, but okay, I know we can't get stuck on these. If you want to cover all of this, we're going to boom, 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 boom. That's it. We can't talk about anything else. Or sometimes they'll come, they've got nothing. Sometimes they don't send me anything and I'm flying blind. But the structure, the ones that need that additional support, I try and put that structure in to help tidy it up a bit more.
I really love the idea of that one in theory. I don't know if that's a good one for me because
Mm,
I know I'm going to look through all those questions ahead of time and then
yep.
spend all this extra time outside of that
Thinking
session
about it.
thinking about it. Yeah.
Yep.
So if I
And
limit
pre-planning.
myself to that time, I have
Yep.
to do it within that time.
Yeah, good. I had others that they would do no preparing. So sometimes the other thing that I would do is say, come in, let's start. We'll sit here for 5 minutes and you quickly jot down your ideas. Then you've got it at the start of the session. That's that same contracting piece that Michelle talks about.
Hmm.
So you could just go, tell me all the things you want to talk about before we get started.
Yeah.
Then let's go. So that might be the easiest way for you to manage that without getting too caught up in it.
Yeah, I think that would work well. And I have
Mm,
been quite lucky that, particularly with the new grad I've been supervising, that she's very proactive and always
yeah.
brings the list.
Yep.
And I know that her learning and supervision style is quite similar to myself, so that has
Mm,
been an easy step.
yep.
But I think that's why I wanted to get a little bit more groundwork underneath me before taking
Hmm.
on other supervisees.
Absolutely. And I think those proactive ones have this caregiver capacity model, which sort of also makes sense in this space. So sometimes you have those therapists that are just in massive overwhelm who are really in that really, really tricky spot. You've got that middle range where they're like wanting to learn, but don't necessarily. And then you've got those really productive, proactive ones that are like, tell me it all. Sometimes they are even harder to work with because you're like, my gosh, I could tell you so much. And it's like you're a sponge and you're just absorbing everything and let's go. But what I have found when I lean too hard into that, they don't retain it. So I've accidentally smashed you with heaps of information because we're having this wonderful conversation. But in another week, that hasn't stuck because we went too hard, too fast across all of the concepts. So that might just be the thing to think about. I'm very good at info dumping. I'm very good at sharing. And I don't know that I always attune effectively as to whether it's sticking well enough. And then, so I've had to learn over the years to slow down. Is this making sense? What are you hearing me say when I say this? What would this look like for you moving forward? And that slow down helps to wrap up that session a lot easier as well.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about using that slowdown as the wrap up because that's
Mm,
definitely been something I've needed to do a lot through my own supervision,
yep.
not just for myself, but I've got quite a few neurodivergent clients who are like twice exceptional, super
Mm,
productive,
mm,
want 20 like
yep.
strategies every session. And that's been a really big learning thing too.
Mm,
Be the one to pump the brakes and hold space.
100%. Yep. And so easy, right? Because you're like, we're just vibing here together. Oh my goodness. But actually, one of us has a lot more knowledge than the other. So our baseline of understanding of this is really different. And it's tricky. But again, coming back and treating it like a client where you go, loves info, but I need to slow down, need to make sure it's sticking, will just help to keep that in your mind. And again, this is where telehealth could be handy because you could literally have it stuck up on your wall in front of you and be like, go slow. Wait, have they got it? Because otherwise you just get in and excited and really good at
Mm,
sharing info.
Yeah, and that's been something that's been helpful to be really clear with those action plans and
Mm,
really specific. Like if, all right, if you're going to look that up, like when are you going to do this? Do you have a
great.
time limit around it? It's
Sick.
much more likely to actually happen.
And do you do the accountability check the next week? Like, how
Yeah.
did you go with those things? Because I found I was missing that. But when I did the Zoom summaries, that made a big difference. Because, like, oh, yeah, we talked about so much. Oh, you ended up with a list of like 50 things to follow up. Okay. How did we go with those things? So I really liked it for that purpose, because otherwise I wasn't wrapping people. I was just like, and bye, leave you open ended with like a million things that I've shared. So it's same as within your big group, like that might be a nice one within the group space to even just wrap that up and go around each of them and say, okay, for you, what does this mean? For you, what does this mean? For you, like that again contains it and helps you to wrap a bit more cleanly.
Yeah, I really like that. And it's same as when I do trainings that if I don't write
Mm,
down like just 2 to 3 dot points, what are my main takeaways that I'm going to
mm,
do from
mm.
this? It's like we talked about so much cool stuff and I forgot 90% of it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. Well, this does bring us to the end of our session. So look at that. We've taken ourselves all the way through. I think we've talked about a lot of, I'm hoping it answered your question. I definitely think clinically you're very solid and ready. Making these conscious choices as how do you want to show up in this space is probably where you want to come in from a very confident perspective as to how you want this to work. You could even have a little play in chat GPT as to different frameworks and models and how that would look and templates and that sort of stuff, so that by the time you're offering it, it's like a full package that you're offering
Mm,
rather than, yeah, I just do external supervision. Let's go. You also then need to think about your consent forms, contracting, things like that. We have a Facebook group for supervisors. I think it's called the Australian Occupational Therapy Supervision. If you have a look on there, there's people that I've shared our template. There's other people who've shared their templates in terms of consent forms and things like that as well. And I know Michelle Bahari's talked a lot around ensuring we've got non-attendance fees covered in there, no shows, that sort of stuff, to really treat it like a business and a service that you are offering, because oftentimes we're not doing that. And because we're going business to business, or, it's not a business to the community, we undersell ourselves a lot rather than going, oh, this is a business and we have to treat it like that.
yeah, amazing.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. We usually wrap this up with a little bit of a note to self. So I wonder, maybe a note to self when you started providing this supervision to the other service, what might you have said to yourself at that point when that opportunity came up for you?
I think as with a lot of other OTs as well, that big imposter syndrome and feeling like I don't know what I'm doing. How am I supposed to
Mm,
help other people figure out what they're doing? But with a lot of things for myself, just jumping in and having a go, that anxiety dissipates and going, okay,
mm,
I actually do know more than I thought I did. It's definitely not perfect yet. I can do things to make this better, but
mm.
to just kind of back myself a bit more.
Absolutely. And I think the more that you get, they call it the social proof. I think about it in that way. The more I get the feedback from the community that I'm like, oh no, I actually do know this. I'll just quickly tell you about, there is this quick framework that they talk about, the reflective competence model, which is a really nice one to think about, because we get to that reflective competence point, we forget all the things that we've learned to get there. So again, that imposter syndrome often comes because these things come naturally to us. We're not putting a lot of headspace, but for yourself, everything that you do, you have thought through in extensive depth. Like, you haven't just jumped to any conclusion. All conclusions have been really well thought out. For me, this is really hard to explain to other people, because I was onboarding a new business coach the other day and he's like, oh, we'll have to do something. I'm like, oh, no, you can just ask me any of those questions. I can tell you, because every one of those tabs is on and I know where everything is at all points. So that's fine. So we often forget that we've done significant thought processes around everything we do. We forget that we hold ourselves in a particular way, look in a particular way, move our bodies in a particular way, which can then just be tricky to impart that knowledge to somebody else. So that would be my main takeaway for you, to think about all the
Mm.
bits that you've taught yourself and go, oh, I probably need to teach somebody else that if they're going to do this work as well.
Yeah. Thank you. That's been super helpful.
Oh, so good. Thank you so much for joining us, Paige.
Thank you so much.
The OT Coaching Confidential podcast exists to support occupational therapists to think clearly, feel less alone, and take meaningful steps in their work. If this conversation resonated for you, take a moment to notice what stood out. Have a think about the takeaways from this session and what you might be able to apply in your own personal or professional practice. If you'd like to keep the conversation going, head on over to the otcoach.au. Inside here, you'll find resources, workshops, trainings, lots of different things, including some new freebies that we've just set up. I've also got the OT Coach Academy, where we have the Pediatric Hub, as well as a brand new Business Owners Hub, and this will be for group practice owners to come together and share and learn. Please note that the information shared in this podcast is general in nature and is not intended to replace individualised advice. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next episode.